And you're live.
Very good. Good morning, all. We'll call today's meeting to order. Let me just begin by saying the primary purpose of today's meeting is for our commission members to discuss and ask questions about the draft applications and regulations for additional Class B facility licenses and for mobile licenses that we've received over the last few days. These additional regulations govern the application process for new licenses. They're in addition to the regulations for operating sports wagering enterprises in Maryland, which were issued by lottery several months ago and which have been available for prospective applicants as they consider their business plans. So based on discussion today, our commission and staff will make additions or changes to the drafts. And at the end of this meeting, we'll decide when to next get together to approve the updated final drafts of these documents. Once SWRC approves the draft regulations, they'll be submitted to the Maryland General Assembly's Administrative, Executive, and Legislative Review Committee, or AELR, for its review and approval. Then after AELR approval, the proposed regulations will be published in the Maryland Register, and there will be an official 30-day period during which the public may submit comments. I'm told there are many interested parties who may wish to express their opinions on these regulations, and staff asks that the public wait for the official public comment period before submitting any comments. Our commission is also still waiting for the completion of the industry analysis to determine whether SWRC may incorporate additional measures that the Maryland General Assembly noted in the sports wagering law. So these process requirements are legally required of us, and I'm sharing this information to help us all adjust expectations as we proceed with our responsibilities. It's our continued hope that we may be able to begin accepting applications in late summer. So with that, I request a motion to approve the draft agenda that was provided to the commission in advance of this meeting.
So moved. Second.
We've been moved and second. Any discussion? Here are none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? So the agenda is approved. And our first agenda item is a review of these draft regulations by Jim Nielsen of the lottery organization.
Almost forgot to unmute myself. There's quite a bit here. I'm going to go through it relatively quickly. Please stop me if any of you have any questions. Broken down into two chapters. Chapter 1 is just general provisions, the scope, which basically includes all the competitive licenses that can be issued. And section 2 is definitions that are specific to these regulations. Chapter 2 is information specifically about the applications and the awardees. Again, part 1 is the scope, relates to all the competitive licenses. 2 is a bunch of, or a little bit of generic general information. Section 3 is separate applications and fees. This reiterates for everyone that the SPR application and fees process is completely distinct from the lottery and gaming side. Obviously, lottery and gaming must prove somebody, an applicant, qualified before you can award a license, but this just lays out that process. Section 4 is a process for the submission of the applications and fees, and this is for both SWRC and lottery and gaming. On the SWRC side, the application and fee will be required to be submitted by, we've got 5 p.m. on a date that will be determined by the commission. On the commission side, as we talked, I think that was last week, the e-licensing portal is now open. We have some people who have contacted us and begun the process of submitting their commission applications, so we're happy about that. They can submit their applications before they actually pay their fee to us. And some have done that. Some have already gone all the way through and submitted the application and paid the fees. Let's see, section 5 is submission of the commission application. Again, this is just nuts and bolts of the way the process will work on the lottery and gaming side. And for clarity, just wanted to say that on the lottery and gaming side, when we're doing an investigation of an applicant, we can look at anybody associated with that entity. If we believe that person has a financial interest or a controlling interest in the potential license holder, we have an obligation and the ability to go ahead and investigate additional people. If there are any investigations that are started and an applicant pulls out, or if it's a fairly simple application, we will refund any amounts that are not spent as part of our investigatory process. We can also bill if the expenses go higher than we had anticipated. Section 6 is submission of the SPR application. A lot of high-level things here. The most important thing for the SPR application is it must be timely. Once the due date and time are set, if an application or the application fee is not accepted on time, the application is invalid, and people really need to understand that. Section 7 is determining the eligibility of applicants. One of the things in this section is that an application must be complete. We want to make clear that we expect both the SPR application to generate some questions as well as the commission applications. So a complete application has most of the information. That doesn't mean that we can't and won't ask questions for clarifications and things like that. Section 7 also talks about the exclusion zones, which is very important. And we've talked about the fact that we're going to try to vet locations before the applications are submitted to make sure that they are in an acceptable area. Section 8, a lot of details about the applications. Paper copies, we're going to get 15. We're also going to get soft copies so that if any of you choose to, you can look at them on a computer. That might be a little bit easier for you. The section describes the information that is needed. Again, it talks about having the fees received in a timely manner. And it also talks about the requirements to give us and SPR the specific details about the ownership of the applicant. It addresses the requirements for a business plan, so we can show that a company has looked at the business and believe they have a good plan to move forward. There is a requirement for the MOU that's in statute that says if an entity seeks investors, they need to seek minority investors and prove who they have looked for. Talked to. Section 9, required submission of additional documents. What we've done here is we've said if SPR asks for information, it must be provided within 10 days unless there is good cause that it can't be, which would be beyond the control of the applicant. And the reason this is in here is we don't want this process to just keep going on and on. We want to make sure that things are accomplished in a timely manner. 10 and 11 talk about changes to the application. Under certain circumstances, you can change an application if you've got a change in your circumstances or there was a mistake in your application. Section 12, you can withdraw. An applicant can withdraw after submitting, but they can withdraw their application without getting back their deposit because that's required in statute. 13 talks about the evaluation criteria. This is something of a work in progress still, but we're building out the kinds of things that we want to look at and that you will want to look at. 14 talks about how the decision to award a license is communicated, how we go about, again, you must wait for the lottery and gaming qualification before you can award a license, and then subsequently we can issue it. 15 and 16 are kind of downstream. They talk about what happens if a license is awarded and then subsequently surrendered, or it lapses, or it's revoked for some reason. And basically it says that SWARC has the ability to go back and reissue a license if it so chooses. 17 is a reminder, and this has come up in some conversations recently. Anybody who applies to lottery and gaming or to SWARC, if there's a change in their circumstances, if something has happened with the business or the owners of the business, they are required to tell us. That's not, I forgot to tell you, that's not, I didn't think it was important. They must tell us all things that happen to the entity. And 19 is ownership criteria. That's reserved at this point for further discussion at a later date. So that's a quick run through of 20 pages. If you have any questions or comments.
So this is Tom. First of all, I want to make the commission aware that Frank Turner joined us. He had trouble with his computer, so he's been on my cell phone listening to Jim. So we've got very good attendance today. I want to encourage the other commission members to ask questions. I will. And I've been harassing the staff for quite a while on this stuff. So, but I want to. What Jim just shared was pretty substantive and significant. I don't know that we're going to be making a lot of changes, but there will be some.
The question I have just refers to on the application itself. Is there any reason why you cannot ask if there is MBE or WBE involvement?
David, you want to answer that? Or want me to?
Yeah, I will. I mean, so, and I don't know if this is something we want to get into in a closed session, but I'm sorry. If
it's something we don't want to talk about in open session, we might want to have closed, I think is what you mean to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's up for the commission to decide if we want to get into closed session to deal with this. I mean, it is an issue that the AG's office flagged. So I can go into further detail. I suggest we go into closed session if we'd like to do that.
You can delay this until later.
Very good. I'll offer the comment that one thing I learned in discussing this draft is the significance of the portal, because with an application that involves a $50,000 application fee or a $500,000 application fee, I can tell you I worried that that's a really risky bet if you just make a mistake in good faith. And I'm paraphrasing what I've been told for the benefit of the other commissioners, and that is our portal is open now or imminently open, and so that in exchange for relatively modest fees, not the full application fee, an applicant can submit draft data and Q&A with sort of impunity and not be at that non-refundable stage that the legislation alludes to. And I don't know, it's not a bright line to me what the point of no return is, where I guess somebody fills out the application as well as they can and they hit send, and then they have to put up that big amount of money. But the e-licensing portal is a critical piece of this process that I've only kind of recently learned about.
Tom, to that point, I just want to say that thus far, since we opened up the portal to potential applicants, we've had 11 conference calls with some of those applicants. So they are reaching out to us and we're reaching back and trying to help them.
Point of no return is once they press send on that e-portal application, correct? I mean, that's when the fee is due.
When they hit submit on the e-licensing, that's when the fee to us is due. The fee for the actual license, the $50,250, is when they submit the application to SWARC.
The SWARC, right? Okay. So up until that point, what the fee they submit to you for background checks or whatever could be potentially refundable.
Yes. Agreed.
Right. So the drop dead, just to be clear for everybody, for the big fee, or what we keep calling the larger amount, is the due date of the SWARC application.
And that's an important point. You know, we haven't established a due date yet, and we've got some other hurdles that I alluded to in the opening remarks that we have to navigate before we can even set a due date. But that's one of the major items of business that lies ahead. Any other questions or comments?
This is Bert. In reviewing, excuse me, the just the general provisions and just reviewing the entire document, it seems like it's been thorough, and the information seems like it's covering everything. I was just curious if, as we look at our process, how does that compare? And I guess Kimberly, maybe you can answer this question. How does it compare with other states and how they went through the process as we're going through?
Sure. I think the uniqueness of this is that there's two different submissions to two different, the SWARC, of course, and then of course to Maryland Lottery. The questions that are asked and the information that's solicited, however, is pretty similar to what you'll see in other jurisdictions. In fact, sometimes you'll see the actual due date for all of the information, because the background information that the commission will need, as well as kind of more of the business ownership, economic development information that SWARC's really interested in. A lot of times you'll see those due at the same time, which is a whole heck of a lot of information for someone to put together. What's interesting, or what we've put forth in these regs, is one, as Jim Nielsen has alluded to, the e-licensing is open, so people could now start that commission application, because it does require a lot of information. So that's something unique to us. That's, I think, a good thing for the industry. And we also, right now, the regs would say the SWARC application is due, and then it says within 30 days after. So you still get additional 30 days after you've submitted the SWARC to do the commission application. So that's somewhat, although a lot of information, the information is pretty traditional of what's asked for in the industry and in this type of application process. But we are giving a little bit more time for folks to complete the background information that goes to the commission. So that's pretty beneficial to the industry.
How are the non-refundable fees handled in the other states? It seems like it's a hefty price to pay once you start the process. And
yeah, it is. The application fees are large. I mean, to anyone, 50,000 to up to 500, which is what the mobile is. I will say, comparatively to other states, frankly, it isn't as expensive as I've seen in other states. For example, we have Extremes, lovely state of Illinois, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Both had very, very significant application fees for their mobile applications, which, for example, in Illinois, it was a $10 million fee. So comparatively to 500,000 for mobile, that seems pretty inexpensive. The state of Tennessee, which only operates mobile only, there is no facility. Their mobile application fee is $750,000. So I would say, certainly don't want to say we're a bargain. There are some states that are less expensive, but relatively, we're probably in the ballpark with a lot of the other states, and somewhat on the less expensive side.
okay, thank you.
Not a problem.
You know, to paraphrase what you said, I think what I've discerned along the way is what makes Maryland unique is this effort to encourage entrepreneurs to get into this industry the way our state's trying to encourage. And that gave rise to SWARC, and of course, this extra layer of process. And it's made it that's a differentiator.
I absolutely agree with that.
Frank, are you able to hear all this? I just want to make sure my technology here is.
Yeah, I'm listening. I was just thinking about Tennessee, and they don't have any casinos down there, so I guess they need to have a higher mobile fee.
Yes, it is the only form. There are not bricks and mortar sports wagering or gambling facilities. You're correct.
So everything there is mobile, and what Frank's saying, that explains that helps explain why their fees are so high.
Yeah, how many licenses did they issue for mobile? Do you know?
Last I checked, and I'm sure someone after this meeting, I'm going to get some sort of text telling me I have the wrong number. Last I checked, I thought they had 12 to 13 licensed. Certainly not the most that we've seen. I think more of the states that have the larger number of mobiles, I would say, would be New Jersey, Indiana, and Colorado, which have well in excess of 20 in each state. So 20 to 25. There's some consolidation that's happening in the industry. So those numbers that you're seeing, well, some of them are now going to fade down and come down because I'm seeing quite a bit of consolidation. But those are relative numbers that I think are plus or minus good about a month or two ago. So I think that we're pretty close.
Thank you.
All right. Any other thoughts or comments about the draft regs as we've seen them, subject to maybe having a closed session later today to pick up on what Laura brought up? All right. Then our next agenda item is review of the draft applications, the two separate forms that we've received, and Kim and Mike of Taft are on deck.
Sure. Good morning again. Thank you for the time. We did create two separate applications, a mobile application and a facility application, but they are quite similar. So I don't think it's really a need to go through each one. I think it might be a little bit more streamlined to kind of walk through what's in both applications, and then I could quickly summarize the differences, but that might be a little bit clearer, I think, for the commissioners to understand. So the applications, as you have them, the first few pages are what you would expect, a little bit of an introduction, explaining the kind of uniqueness in Maryland where we do have the two commissions and sort of the two applications and two-step kind of process. It also sets forth the instructions for submitting, how you submit these. Again, the commission applications can only be submitted through the e-licensing portal. SPR doesn't have such a portal established, and because of its limited life, probably isn't going to invest in that time and effort to generate one. So we're back to old school paper copies for the SWART submission, which good, bad, or indifferent, it is what it is. So that's what we have. But that's explained in here, and also how you pay the fee by wire instructions and so forth are explained in the introduction, so to say, paragraphs. The meat of the application and what's being asked in the application, again, is pretty much the same in both. I'll go through what is in all of the applications first, and then of course explain the differences between the facility and the mobile. The first section is really just identifying information. Tell me who you are, what your business name is, your tax ID, the point of contact, basic identification of who are you, applicant. And then of course, for the facility, we had to add what type of facility license are you applying for? The B1 license, which is of course for the larger operators or the larger businesses, or the B2, which is a lesser fee, but also for much smaller businesses. That's kind of section one of what applicants would give back to us. So not so exciting. Obviously, if there's any comments, anyone can certainly interrupt me. Not a problem. The second piece that the applicants will provide to us back is information about their ownership. It's somewhat similar information that they would be providing in the commission application for their review and licensing. But again, because we're two different bodies, although some people might think it's repetitive, it may need to be asked for different purposes, of course, but also asked again, so to say, in both applications. What we've asked here is one, kind of an organizational chart of ownership, and then two, a more detailed capitalization table. Sometimes it's easier to see it schematically in a chart form, so that's why we've asked for it in both ways. And it also comports with what they've probably done in other jurisdictions. Again, I don't think it's a lot of new information. It's likely a lot of the same information and ownership that they would be providing to the commission in their application. We also want to see any documents that any documents or agreements that talk about that ownership. So that would be organizational documents of the applicant, most likely. I mean, most often these are limited liability companies. So I would expect to see that in an operating agreement. There might be revenue share agreements or partnership agreements that I would expect us to be seeing as well. So we've asked for those. Then we've asked for an organizational chart on management, who's running the day-to-day, who are the control persons. Think in a corporation, officers, directors, the C-suite type folks. We of course also have the applicants, as Mr. Nielsen advised in the regs. The statute requires that anyone in the future, if an applicant is awarded a license and they seek investors, they have to sign a memorandum of understanding with SWARC to say that they will use good faith efforts to interview some types of applicants that might be minority or female. Doesn't mean that they have to become owners, but they at least have to use good faith efforts there. So we asked them to acknowledge and agree to that if they are awarded a license, that they will sign that MOU. It's the same MOU, I believe, I know that we've used for all of the licenses we've currently issued. So it shouldn't be a surprise. And we would, one of the comments I have received from some of the commissioners already is to attach that memorandum so people know what it looks like. Not a problem, it's been in use, so that could be done. Section 3 of what we ask applicants to provide is, again, more of their organizational documents. So what they report in their capitalization table or ownership table is something that we could verify or understand, so we can understand the true ownership and also, again, the true management of the company or the applicant. This is where it starts to diverge when section numbers. Section 4 of the facility application, this is a different piece. Because it's a facility, we have to ask things about location, meaning, are you in an enterprise zone? Are you in an opportunity zone? Are you in an exclusion zone? Because there's these radius restrictions around some of the casinos and some of the OTB facilities that are already licensed. So that would be section 4 of the facility license. We don't need that for the mobile because there is no physical presence that you would have required. After that, the next section, again, it would be section 4 on the mobile or section 5 of the facility. We ask about the experience of the applicant. Okay, applicant, tell me, have you done this in other states? Do you have licenses in other states? Have they been revoked, suspended? Have you had fines in other states or jurisdictions? Or if you're new to this, that's fine too. Tell me the experience of perhaps your principals, your owners, your executives. I'm assuming you assembled a team to tell us your experience. Or of course, many folks, I suspect, may contract with an operator to do their sports wagering, which is not unusual. Some of our Class A licensees have contracted with someone to do their sports wagering operations. It would be an online sports wagering operator if it's someone contracting for mobile operations. We call it a sports wagering facility operator on the facility side. So that experience could come through that person or that entity or that collaboration as well. So we're just saying, tell us, this is the time for them to shine and tell us how great that they would be in the sports wagering industry. The next section that we go, it's section 5 of the mobile, section 6 of the facility is financial information. Obviously, we want to know that financial wherewithal and stability is important to the state. So we ask for provide us financial statements. So obviously for existing businesses, they could do that. If you're a new startup, of course, you'll tell me you can't do that. And tax returns for a 2-year period is what we look for. I know the commission asks for a longer period of financials, but we They asked for a 5-year period. We thought 2 would be okay for what the SWARC is trying to assess. But of course, that's open for discussion and comment of this group. The next provisions go into asking the applicant's business plan. And that's pretty important to us. And what we mean by that is, rather than just saying, give us a business plan, we tried to do it in bite-sized components to say, tell me your sources and uses of capital and evidence that you have that capital. So that might be letters of debt or equity commitments. It might be loan documents. It might be evidence that they have the equity in. So we ask for essentially your financing sources and your estimated uses of those sources for your first few years of operation. We ask for pro forma financial statements, budgets, and financial statements. We've asked that for a period of 5 years, the logic being that we have a 5-year license, initial license term. So we'd like to see what that anticipated projections and revenues would be. We also ask for the marketing plan and the name under which they'd be operating in sports wagering. From there, there's quite a few differences that let's go with what we do commonly, and then I'll add the facility extra piece, so to say, at the end, if that's easier. The next sections relate to tell me how you plan to operate and how you can comply with some very important provisions of the sports wagering laws and regulations. And that is, how do you prevent unlawful wagering? That would be underage wagering, wagering by anyone who's voluntarily or mandatorily excluded players, that the commission maintains, I suspect, lists for that, like they do in many states. For the mobiles, tell me how you geofence and protect us from having outside people coming to people outside of the state of Maryland wagering, and how you would anticipate having controls in place to not accept wagers from other prohibited folks involved with the NFL, the MLBs, the different leagues, employees, so forth. That's set forth in the sports wagering regs of the commission. We also ask for the mobiles. We ask where your servers will be located. As you probably know, they must be located in the state of Maryland. We just need to confirm that for mobile applicants. We also ask about marketing plans. I know it's a very competitive business. We've talked about that probably ad nauseum at a lot of these commission meetings. So we want to know what the plans are for this applicant to remain competitive and be competitive in Maryland. And then we also ask about documents for, again, evidencing these partnerships, revenue sharing. Part of their marketing plan might have market affiliations. Show me evidence and agreements of that, so we can, I don't want to say vet or check, but it's kind of a spot check of what someone might have said in an application. We also ask, what's very important to us is, of course, if you are issued a license, how quickly can you get to market? How quickly do you think went from issuing of license to award of license? Because of course, speed to market is somewhat important to the state, as they'd like to see tax dollars come somewhat in the near future, not a very long time from now. We also ask about banking relationships. And as a note, I know that's become a point of contention for some of the smaller startups. We've tried to work through with some of those folks as some suggestions. I'm hoping that those open up for them. Wish I owned a bank to help, but I know we've tried to put that information out to a lot of the smaller startups. The one other piece for the facility licenses that we ask, again, because they're in Maryland, they are likely an existing business. They might have a location that where they're going to operate their sports wagering. So the additional questions would be, do you own that location? Do you lease that location? If you lease that location, we've asked for extra assurances from your landlord that they don't think operating sports wagering would violate your lease terms with them, and that they're in agreement. And we look for a lease term of at least 5 years. Again, that's the initial term of a license. So that's an extra thing that we're asking for. We're also asking for, with facility licenses, employment, because of course you likely have existing employees that you have in Maryland, and maybe perhaps new employees. So we ask information about that. And you might have capital expenditures or economic development that you're doing in the state. For example, you might have to renovate a space or expand your space. And we ask questions about that. Of course, those are not questions that would be applicable to the mobiles. We do ask the mobile applicants if they expect to have a physical presence in Maryland. And if they do, then tell me that employment information as well, but of course that wouldn't be required. Finally, the last section, SWARC can award licenses to folks that they think have met or are in the best public interest of the state of Maryland. We've asked the applicant, tell me why you think you should get a license. What's the public interest that's satisfied by issuing you a license? That's an applicant's opportunity to tell us in their own words, their sales pitch of why they should be getting a license, because this is a competitive process. And we've also said, of course, did we miss something? Is there something unique about your business that you'd like to tout? Tell us about that here. And then the final piece we say is we ask for them to affirm, of course, that they will operate in accordance with local laws, federal laws, state laws, which I think is pretty obvious, but we've asked just for an affirmation as well. And of course, an affirmation that we know that sports wagering is a risky undertaking and endeavor. And we're hoping, or we believe, all of those questions that we've asked, all that information would be enough for then SWARC to assess through the evaluation criteria, which Mr. Nielsen explained is in section 13 of the regulations, the criteria that SWARC would consider. With that information, we'd obviously pair it against and look at those evaluation criteria before assessing a license or awarding a license. So that kind of summarizes the application and hopefully the differences between the two. And I'm hoping those differences make logical sense to everyone. But of course, I can entertain any questions if there are any, or comments. Obviously, if there are comments to applications, they could also be sent, to us outside of this meeting. It doesn't have to be done here, but we'd be more than happy to incorporate them in a draft and resubmit them to the group.
Kim, can I point out one thing?
Sure.
We acknowledge that these applications are comprehensive and require a lot of information. What we've done in other jurisdictions, and this is totally up to the commission whether they want us to approach it this way, is that we, Taft, have prepared summaries of the responses in the applications. We generally start with something we call an at-a-glance chart, which is basically a grid that lays each of the responses from each applicant side by side with the different categories of questions, so that the commission can get an initial feel for how applicants are responding to these questions. So we will be discussing with you in the meeting how you would like to process the information once the applications come back, because I know it can be a little daunting when you see the scope of what we're requesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's kind of something we'll have to discuss. Obviously, we got to get the applications going, but then the next piece for us is, well, how would SWARC like to assess them or begin that assessment or evaluation?
Questions or comments from commission members? God bless you, Kim. I will just comment. It's come into focus to me how significantly different the applications for the Class B facility licenses and the notion of a mobile business are. The words overlap. The relative scale, potential scale of a fixed-based facility is substantially lower and proportionally indicated by our application fees as far as the overall economic significance to the owner investor of a facility. On the other hand, in contrast, a mobile license entails no real estate. It entails relatively few employees. It is a software app sourced somehow by some platform provider, and a substantial financial back end where there's a lot of cash that moves around, subject to banking and regulation and some unique aspects of being in a sports book enterprise, and that can be a very large scale proposition. So I just share those lessons learned from the conversations I've been a party to so far. I would ask one question. With regard to our facility licenses, are we overdoing it? Is it, are we making it too hard with all the stuff we're asking for. You know, going back to the question about comparing and contrasting to other states, it's a lot for a you know, a restaurant or a, you know, a startup. It sounds like.
Tom, I agree with you. It's an awful lot of, just listening to what is required to get a license. For the average person, it's going to be overwhelming. And it's not fool ourselves. I mean, that is a lot of information.
I don't know if you all can hear Frank, and you know, I don't, you know, I've been a party to the draft up to this point, and I've frankly more been focused on the mobile than on the fixed site. But I, you know, where I'm, you know, a bean counter that wants to see a good business plan, and God knows, you know, with moving around a lot of cash, you got to be auditable. So you've got to have enough systems and controls so that if somebody's cheating or stealing, you catch them. But you know, I listened to the application just now, and I was taken aback. And I don't know, I don't have a recommendation, but I'm interested in other people's thoughts on this. And is there anything we ought to do at this stage?
I don't have a recommendation either, but I do say, as I was saying, it feels very overwhelming just to look at all of what is required. And the question is also the time frame to get all that information in. It's got to be really, I don't really worry about that. You know,
I guess my question would be, is this significantly more information than what the lottery sees for businesses looking for a lottery license?
Yes, it is significantly more, but there's a key difference. With the lottery, it's a store. We give them a terminal. We give them all their supplies. It's running through our system. And the liability that they have for the tickets they sell, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
There is no infrastructure coming to them. They got to get it all in place. They need, you know, the initial funds, the $500,000 for the bank. So yes, it's a lot more, but the scope is so different.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point. I mean, a lottery participant's more a licensee of the lottery.
Right. The software, the central system, for lack of a better term, is run and managed by the commission themselves.
Yep.
This is, again, it's not an easy undertaking, and we've talked about that quite a bit. And it's still, I mean, as much as we want to say it's for smaller businesses, we should maybe be, you know, not as stringent. I mean, they're taking money from citizens in the state of Maryland on wagers, and we need to protect that integrity. It's gambling, whether we want to say it's sports wagering, it's by small businesses, or however we want to couch it, it's still wagering in the state. So it needs to, you know, maintain the same integrity standards. I can say that the request of the information is fairly similar. We certainly didn't create this in a vacuum. I'd love to say we're brilliant, we came up with this application. I'd like to also admit we probably plagiarized from some of the states for some of the questions. That, you know, the best form of flattery is to mimic it or copy it, I suspect. So we didn't, this was not in a vacuum. We certainly looked at other jurisdictions that have facility licenses as well, and tried to copy and paste, for lack of a better term, but may obviously structure it for Maryland, but take pieces from what we thought were good applications. Because I'm not sure what information we would, more than happy to discuss it, could quote unquote cut out for a group, because of course a lot of the bigger pieces or problematic pieces are for the integrity of gaming is the problem.
Kim, I just
suggest that as well, that I mean, with the smaller entities, you know, maintaining the required infrastructure, I mean, you can't get around that. You got to have it, or else you're going to have problems.
Well, and I suspect most of the folks, if not all of the facility licenses, and this might be a general, I mean, I might be surprised when we get applications, but I suspect that they will have partnered with an operator to handle a lot of this, the sports wagering component of it. And therefore it might be someone a little bit more experienced on it, who's done it somewhere else, and it may not be as daunting as it were. projecting.
Kim, I
Go
just
ahead, Mike.
wanted to chime in. I think the public trust aspect of this, which you touched upon, is very important. And to the extent that the comprehensiveness of this application weeds out smaller operators who may be attracted to the idea of operating a sports wagering operation, but don't have the funds or the experience or the ability to plow through a lengthy application. I think we want to weed them out. I think that's important for as you said, the integrity of the industry.
Has that, excuse me, has that been the experience in the other states, that you end up with the smaller facilities having the operators, a professional operator, or someone that's already done this before? And is that something that we should sort of recommend as we look at this process?
I think for these types of licenses, I would expect folks to partner or revenue share, enter into some sort of collaboration or agreement with experienced operators. Doesn't mean it can't be done. There are startups happening every day that go into sports wagering. But I would expect that to be the case. And I think at our public session that we had in May, we certainly said that, and the experienced operators talked about that and various opportunities for partnering or like collaborating or making contracting arrangements. I would expect that would be the case here too.
In keeping up with the partnership, especially for some of the smaller operators, if you will, who may not really have the infrastructure, but we still want it to be true MBEs, that are in some of these relationships as well, because we tend to, at least I think some of the consternation out in the quote unquote general public is when we say that there's a minority interest, it's so minute, it's so small, it's simply not really true. It's there as a shell. So we still want to encourage the partnerships, but we want them to be true partnerships with equity positions, if you will, as opposed to in name only.
Right. I agree with that. I would think that the licensee, again, those arrangements, I've seen a number of different types of the ways that they are, but I think you've made a very good point. Of course, we'd like to see that.
The license should be the asset for those MBEs and those WBEs, and hopefully they will leverage them accordingly.
Agreed, Laura.
I think the point Frank's bringing up is as I digest on it, as far as how daunting this, even our Class B license applications are, is the stage of evolution of the technology underlying the industry. For lottery and these terminals at the 7-Elevens and so on, you've got a lot more licensor control over the software and the process, I think I'm hearing said, whereas the sports wagering industry is at an earlier stage of evolution, and the control and responsibility for the software and the devices resides in the licensee much more, and therefore, as I heard Kim say, and John, Michael say, we can't expose the public to loosey-goosey money movement in the absence of the kind of rules we're laying out here, that we're depending on the licensee to manage and control themselves. I have learned that there are some sort of platforms evolving in sports wagering with growing levels of maturity, and even the likes of DraftKings and the other big one are licensing a third party's application software that is subject to being skinned for different branding and marketing purposes. But sports wagering isn't there yet, that we are at the point of licensing and approving platforms. We have to do it through the licensee. in what SWORC is doing now. So I'm saying those things, inviting corrections or critique by the experts in this.
No, there's no critique. There's no critique. I would just add to that. There are companies out there that do offer turnkey solutions today for physical in-person wagering. And I believe that some of them spoke at our May 6th meeting, which of course, if anyone wants to see, you can go back. It's on our SWORC website and look at it. There are some entities out there that do offer solutions, kiosks and so forth. And they offer the technology piece, let's put it that way, but then of course it's the licensees or the applicants, employees, but they're trained with the same provider on what they need to know and how to do it. But they do at least offer there are some solutions out there for the software and the turnkey operations.
Okay. Any other questions or comments about the draft applications, fellow commissioners?
Yeah, well, other than Tom, I do believe that before people make any firm commitment to filling out that application, they need to know they ought to have a laundry list of what's going to be required of them, because then a time frame where all of this has got to be done by. I think in all fairness, because it is an awful lot of information, and to start down that road and the expense of preparing it, they ought to at least know all of this is going to be required of you. So I mean, just even if it was a one-page outline of what's going to be required, I think it's just a good idea so that they don't start down that road and realize it's too much for them to handle. That's just my.
I'm hoping everybody could hear Frank. So in essence, just to paraphrase what I heard him saying is that for each of these applications, a one-page high-level summary of all the stuff that an applicant needs to have. And I know I've tried to digest the requirements that are both in the SWORC and in the lottery sets of rules with which an applicant must comply. It's a judgment call as to what are the high level things to call out. But maybe that's an ask that for each of these, a one pager of what are the major things in addition to a $50,000 or a $500,000 application fee that an applicant should submit. Is that a fair paraphrase, Frank? Or
yeah, I mean, they should just have an idea, because I mean, you could look at that and say, wow, do I really want to go? Do I really want to do this? And once, I just think it's an awful lot of material, and they ought to know before they get into it.
I think there are a few gating issues that we could highlight. I think certainly the financial resources, the lease requirement, the zoning requirement. I mean, these are things that you can't get past them. So I think Frank's suggestion is a good one.
I think the SWORC.org would be a really good place to post that.
Right.
Yeah, this is a little bit different and more concise than an FAQ. So I know I've spent some time clicking on those, and I get tired after about the 12th one. So kind of a one-page highlights of here's what you need to do to be in this game. And again, reflecting the fact that in sports wagering, we don't have mature commercial off-the-shelf software packages that we can presume are trustworthy. So in that respect, at this juncture, this is a burdensome enterprise for a licensee. And it ain't just us trying to be difficult. It's the world we're in right now. So I think that's a consensus action item requested by SWORC for I guess to get some draft one-pagers back to us, maybe before we next meet.
Sure, we have it marked as an action item, so we'll be getting that to the commission members.
Thank you. All right, teammates. Anything else about the applications? It's been a good conversation, I think. The elephant in the room is the MBE stuff, and I think it's incumbent on us to at least have a brief closed session explicitly to hear legal advice around what we can and can't do as SWORC with these documents at this juncture. Is that a sufficient basis, attorneys, for inviting a closed session?
Yes, it is.
All right, with that, do I have such a motion from a commissioner to?
So it's a motion to go into closed session to seek legal advice pursuant to General Provisions Article 3305B7.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor or any discussion? I'm supposed to do that. Robert's rules. Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, it's unanimous that we proceed to closed session.
So, Mr. Chairman, this is what we'll have to do. Katie, leave. You could set up a separate room for us to go in, and we'll have to send the commission members a separate email link that you can log into, because this one I have to say.
I can actually send you all to a breakout room right now.
You can? Okay, great.
Perfect. Thank you.
And are we, just so the public knows, is SWORC coming back into open session after this closed session? Or
If we're not obliged to, I don't believe we have any other business except to adjourn. So if we can skip that step, I'm all for it.
yes, you can.
Thanks.
George, is that correct? Can we go straight out of the closed session and end it there?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's
Great.
correct.
Then I'll stop